So it's my pleasure to do this fireside chat with Kay, who is going to be one of the speakers at Science House in Davos, as well as a number of other places. So Kay has mentioned she's one of the world's foremost experts on AI governance. She's the founder and CEO of Good Tech Advisory, and she's just come out with a new book on January 13th called Coexisting with AI, Work, Love, and Play in a Changing World. She won a Time 100 Impact Award in 2024, Forbes 50 over 50 for her contributions to work on good AI governance. And until 2023, she was head of AI at the World Economic Forum and a member of the Forum's executive committee. She was the world's first chief AI ethics officer in 2014. And she's a barrister, a former judge, a professor, a technologist, and entrepreneur. So with that, Kay, you've just come from London, where you testified before Parliament about AI and human rights. Can you give us a recap of the discussion, please?
Absolutely, and it's a pleasure to be here, and it will be a pleasure to be with you in Davos as well. So the UK Parliament has a joint committee on human rights, and a joint committee is where the Lords and the Commons get together. So they asked me to go along there to talk about AI and how AI might interdict our human rights. And it was an absolute pleasure for me to go and know that there are politicians in the world thinking about putting the human first. You know, we hear so much about the age of AI, but maybe we should be thinking about the age of humans and what AI can do for us as we move forward in our lives. And so those are the discussions that they're having in Parliament, which is important in my view.
Well, so you and I have talked in conversation, we've talked about how it's deeply important that, you know, people understand AI, this powerful tool, and what it can do for us, but also what we might not want it to do for us. So you wrote that book with that aim, and so can you just, you know, give us the high-level view of how you structured the book and why?
Yes, certainly. And I do think that one of the things that is most missing is a conversation beyond walls, rooms like this. We are, for example, teaching our children to be AI literate, but are we teaching them to understand what using AI does for them and might do for society, and how they want to shape society in the future? And so, being a complete Shakespeare nerd, what I did was I chose the 7 stages of man, probably people, but Shakespeare, of course, called it man. So I have looked at what AI is doing now and might do from infancy, which I took to be under 6, through to elder care.
Okay, so let's dive into those 7 stages of man, and let's start with young children under the age of 6. And you know, what do you see as the pros and cons, or the dangers of AI for children that young?
Yes, absolutely. And you know, we need to ensure that our children are brought up as AI natives, but we also need to ensure that as they are growing up, particularly the under 6s, they are not being exposed to having their data taken. We know where their data is going. About 96% of all the AI-enabled toys for that actual age group come from China. We need to know where the data is going beyond going back to the company, because most of them will have voice recognition, and many of them will have facial recognition. And so you need to be thinking about where that data is going, how it's being processed, how it's being used. And one of the things we did at the World Economic Forum was look at labeling for those sort of toys. So for 2 years, we ran something called the Smart Toy Awards, where we invited manufacturers to submit their toys, and we, against a list of, for example, what is the education that my child is receiving from this toy? Because often there is nothing on the box to tell you. So, against this set of criteria, we then awarded prizes and labeled them then that this was a safe toy for your under sevens. I do feel that in that market, a labeling for what AI is doing in a toy is a really good way forward, and perhaps doesn't need as much regulation and legislation and heavy-handedness.
Okay, so let's then talk about the next stage, like school-age children. And, there's a big push now for AI literacy in schools. Estonia became the first country in the world to introduce AI chatbots into public schools, starting with high school, but with plans to rapidly expand all the way down to, first grade. They're starting with teachers, then, going to students. They did deals with OpenAI and Google because they said there was no alternative. The companies have agreed upfront not to use the data. They also developed special chatbot models for the schools that would, with the aim of having the children use AI as a supplement rather than a replacement for doing their own work. However, from the get-go, when I reported on this, the teachers were telling me, well, look, the kids already have had ChatGPT for a while, and there's no way they're going to use a altered, less good model. So given that that's the reality, what should we do to make sure that we're enhancing learning and not replacing the learning process?
Yeah, I think we have to be really mindful about the fact that we ask so much of our children. They've got to be great at school, they've got to be great at music, they've got to be great in athletics. And whether that's at school or in university, that's a huge amount of pressure. So of course they're going to turn to any tool that can help them. For some people, that might be simply so that they can do another job to pay for their education. So we need to acknowledge that this is something that they are going to use, but then we need to make sure that they, again, it's back to AI literacy, that they understand that, if you're not doing the work yourself, you're not actually learning it. There are good studies that say if you're writing anything down, and I've got my book here, you remember it, and you can critically think about the detail of what you've written down better than if you type it. And if you use AI to do your work for you, then you really are not engaging with the material at all. And so I think if we help our students to understand that, that's the first point of being able to interact with AI and understand what are the pros and what are the cons, because we're also seeing that some undergraduates coming out of university don't actually understand their degree, so in my case it was law, don't understand their undergraduate law degree enough to actually get the degree, because they gave everything to a chatbot to write. So that becomes a problem then for society, because what's the value of a degree? And it becomes a problem for employers, because I work with a lot of companies, and employers are saying, well, how do we think about employment if we can't trust the undergraduate degree?
Wow. So critical thinking is, clearly, something that is in danger if people rely too much on AI. But there are also a lot of other threats for teenagers. So let's talk about some of those. Suicide. Let's talk about, falling in love with chatbots. And let's talk about the idea of not taking into account the sustainability aspects of, say, asking ChatGPT, what should I wear to school today, and what impact does that have on the environment? So let's talk about all of those things as well.
Yeah, sure. So I had the privilege of sharing a car yesterday with the head of the Kinsey Institute. And he said, we are a species in crisis because we are not able to form communities and form relationships in the way that we have been able to. And we could look at lots of causes for that. But what that means in actuality is, for example, over 25% of American men are in an intimate relationship with a chatbot. So we are in this loneliness epidemic. The Atlantic wrote that 76% of orders from restaurants in New York are takeouts. You don't even stop in the restaurant and perhaps form a relationship or even talk to anybody. You dash in, get your takeaway, and take it home and eat it. So there are all these sort of problems, and AI is there to fill the void in your life if you're not careful. That obviously is a danger for our species as a whole, but also, we do have these terrible problems where it does appear that engaging with AI does lead to suicide. There is now a Wikipedia page dedicated to alleged suicides as a result of engagement with AI. Character AI and Google recently settled a case out of court, so we don't know what the settlement or the terms were, with a mother who alleged that by talking to a character AI avatar, her son had found himself, had been engaged in suicide. I think it, again, goes back, and this is why I wrote the book, it goes back to AI literacy. We have to understand what we're doing, and we need to understand, and I think that there is a blurring of lines here that, your new lover has no empathy, doesn't understand anything, doesn't understand life, death, fear, any of those things. And so you are entering a life which is completely fake. And then to your question about sustainability, we know that at the moment, and obviously everybody's working on this, it takes a quarter of a liter of water every time you ask a question of an LLM. And so, I think it's an interesting problem. And again, I think it goes to AI literacy, that the generation that actually is most invested in climate change and worried about it is the generation that are asking the stupid questions.
Okay. All right, let's move to a couple other areas that you cover in the book that have serious implications. And one of them is war. So let's talk about, the need for a new Geneva Convention.
Yes, so one of the things I told the Parliament is that, our human rights conventions, the Geneva Convention, they all need a good rewrite in the face of what we're seeing with AI. Conventions were written about humans and human combatants. That's no longer the case. The UK, for example, has what they call uncrewed ships. And uncrewed ships for patrol the seas around the UK, they're landing crafts, they're minesweepers. It makes sense because there are insufficient people to actually be in the military. My daughter is a pilot in the US Air Force, and already some of the aircraft can not only return fire, but also take a wounded pilot home to base. As a mother, that's a great thing to know, but as somebody who thinks about society and things like the Geneva Convention, that sort of thing, having autonomous return of fire, is simply not covered. And it's something for our society that we need to think about. We need to think about what happens if we take the human out of the loop. And the robot that we saw on the screen earlier simply follows somebody until they achieve the kill. I also worry, and particularly in the US, they're ramping up the use of AI across all weaponry. But we haven't solved those hallucination problems, we haven't solved the bias problems, we haven't solved the accountability problems. And all of those are things that should be part of a Geneva Convention.
Okay, you're a lawyer and a former judge. Let's talk about the impact on the justice system. And, if we lose trust in the justice system, what impact that can have on society.
Absolutely. Well, one of our human rights is a right to remedy. But if we don't know that AI has been used in, for example, hiring decisions or loans or any of those sort of things, we don't have a right to remedy because we simply don't know that we have been harmed. Beyond that, what we are seeing in common law is that hallucinations are coming into legal briefs as case names, as resumes of the case, which you get at the top of all reports, and also as completely fake judgments. One of my colleagues in Chambers recently had 14 hallucinations in a brief sent to him. In that brief also was a deep-faked medical report. It was a medical negligence case. So if we cannot weed these things out of the justice system, we will end up with decisions in common law being made on erroneous bases, i.e. something that a chatbot made up, and that will fundamentally undermine the rule of law.
We are almost out of time, but we have two other important areas I want to make sure that we touch on, and one of them is business. And so you're having the same problem there, where you're getting hallucinations and polluted data in company reports and information that are then being stored in the database and, will replicate going forward. So, what do you see as the dangers there?
Yes, so, we all know that just recently a consulting company put out 2 reports, one for Australia and one for Canada, and they were riddled with bias, with hallucinations as well. That's probably something they shouldn't have done and shot themselves in the foot in that way. But the problem is that whenever you're in business and you are using an AI that hallucinates, that will go up into the data that is in your proprietary stack. So we're not talking about hallucinations and data in the LLM. We're talking about it infecting your business proprietary data. And how you manage that and how that company, for example, stops that incorrect information then trickling down into another report is one of the major things that we need to think about.
And then very quickly, let's talk about AI and healthcare. And in the news recently, OpenAI has just launched a service where they are encouraging people to upload their personal medical records so that the chatbot can give them better advice. What do you see as the dangers around that, and what other dangers do you see?
Well, obviously, they have said that they won't be using that data for training, and they say that there are better safeguards around that data. I don't know whether that's true. What we do know is that in all companies, you can have a change of heart and a change of policy at any stage. And so we should be aware of that as human beings who might be going to upload our data. But I want to remind you of a report in Nature in August of last year, where they looked at a clinical diagnosis using chatbots, and they found that it was hallucinating up to 88% of the time, and even when they dealt with that, they only brought it down to 23%. So I think it's obviously it's particularly worrying. Also, you're simply going to get an answer of what might be wrong with you, but you can't get any treatment or a prescription, so that's fundamentally problematic. But I think the other thing that's sort of worrying is that there are increasing, especially in the United States at the moment, increasing numbers of people who have nowhere else to turn. And so we are truly creating this two-tier system of you get a human doctor or you just get the best that you can because you've uploaded your medical documents, which are not HIPAA compliant. OpenAI is not HIPAA compliant to the AI.
We are out of time. There was so much more to discuss, but just as a parting thought, what do you want the audience to take away from this conversation?
I'd like you to take away from the conversation that we really need AI, especially in the global north, because as we grow older and we have a smaller working population, we will need AI to help us. We'll need AI at every stage of our lives. But what we need is good AI, and we need to use it wisely. And we need now to have a conversation about what we want for our future and our family's future as we humans go into the future with AI. Thank you.
With that, let's have a nice round of applause for Kay.